Have you ever felt like you're too disconnected or too reactive with your spouse? In today's episodes, we're diving into the power of boundaries, how to create them, when to soften them, and how they can transform the way you relate to each other. And at the end of the episode, we're going to give you a free meditation for creating healthy, functional boundaries. This is going to be a powerful episode. Buckle up. Let's go.
Today, we're diving into the topic of boundaries, specifically how boundaries affect our ability to stay connected or to stay in intimacy with another person. But before we can explore that, we need to define what boundaries really are. We hear that word a lot, but what are they and what are they not?
Yeah, I know we hear them often, especially when it's like, oh, they have way too many boundaries or they don't have any boundaries.
Or I need to get some boundaries.
Here, I need to get some boundaries. So if you're wondering about what those things mean today, we're going to talk about it. So there's two types of boundaries, psychological and physical. And let's start with the more straightforward one, which is our physical boundary. This refers to kind of your personal space, your right to decide how close someone can stand to you, how you are touched, how you choose to touch another person. It's about control over your own body. Mm-hmm. Physical boundaries also include things like your privacy, deciding whether or not someone can listen to your private conversations or maybe read your personal journals.
Right. So your stuff, your personal belongings, your personal body, right? Yeah. So while external physical boundaries are clearly important, they're actually not the main focus of today's episode. Today, we're here to talk about the internal boundary, which is your psychological boundary. And so today we're going to be drawing on the work of Pia Mellody and also Dr. Terry Real.
Yeah, and these aren't as well understood.
Correct.
But I would maybe argue equally as important.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about the psychological boundary, and this is the boundary of your psyche, right? Imagine you have this invisible force field, this protection field that's around you that serves to protect you mental and emotional space from other people psychologically.
Right.
Right? So this is your protecting, right? This is the boundary line between what is your responsibility and what really belongs as someone else's responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's a functional boundary that helps us to separate our thoughts, beliefs, and emotions from those people around us.
Yeah.
And if this boundary is functional, it gives us a courage to dare to be known,
to be intimate, to be connected to someone else,
to be vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just like we talked about last week with self-esteem, there is a Goldilocks effect when it comes to boundaries, just like there was with self-esteem. You can have too much, you can have too little, or just the right amount. Okay.
I love that analogy.
Both extremes, whether it's too much boundary, too little, both sides of the spectrum are dysfunctional. Okay. There's essentially two different perversions of boundaries. The sweet spot, of course, is what lies right there in the middle. And that's where we have healthy, functional, protective, psychological boundaries, right? Neither too rigid nor too porous. But most of us, as Robert just alluded to, aren't really aware of what this psychological boundary really is, how it functions, and we consequently really struggle to have a functional boundary in place.
Well, we don't even know if we need one. We're not certain what it does.
Or how to do it.
Right? So let's start by talking about what too little of a boundary may look like in your life and in your relationship. Maybe you'll recognize this, maybe not. But
yes,
if your boundary is too porous, if your force field is too permeable, it has a lot of holes. And as a result, you tend to be a little bit more reactive. Maybe people are calling you thin-skinned is a good explanation. This overly permeable boundary is also called boundaryless.
Boundaryless.
And everything pierces you because there's no protection. So if someone says, oh, you've gained a few pounds, right away you start dieting, right? If someone says you're too serious, you sign up for like an improv class or maybe try to learn some jokes. If someone questions your qualifications, you're going to enroll in more courses because now you sort of have to prove to yourself by gaining additional qualifications. So whatever the stimulus comes your way, you sort of react to it because there's no barrier between you and the feedback you're receiving. And then everything just sort of gets through the boundary and everything hurts. And we also feel like we need to react to everything.
Yeah. So I love that. That's a perfect explanation. And if we were to give boundaryless a tagline or a slogan, it would probably be something like, I am just so hurt that you could think this way about me. Right. And honestly, this is not a mature mindset. The reality is that grown-ups are allowed to think whatever they want, and they may think positive things about you. They may not think positive things about you. Some of the things that they believe will be true, and some of the things that they believe will be untrue.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Right. But a boundaryless person lets everything come through because their protective force field is just full of holes.
So they're really getting bombarded by all of that information.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned in the beginning, right? Something that belongs to us and some things belong to them.
Right.
Right. Okay. Right. So what's really going on with someone who has no boundary is that their sense of self, who they are, is dependent on other people. You're trying to regulate yourself through connection with other people and you seek validation through your relationship with them. This enmeshment sometimes is called codependent. And your sense of self becomes entangled with another person. So you feel the need to attempt to control how and what they think and how they feel about you in order for you to feel good about yourself. You don't really have a solid sense of self unless someone else gives it to you. And we've talked about this in past podcasts. It's called a borrowed sense of self. And if someone isn't feeling good about you, the only way that you can feel good about yourself is to attempt to change their opinion of you.
I need to
Did that make sense?
Yeah, I need to make you change or make you see me in a different way so that I can feel good about me. Because if you don't feel good about me, I don't feel good about me.
Yeah, and we take it all in. It all hits.
Right.
It all hits. And then we have to react to every piece of feedback without considering right or wrong or what belongs to them.
The way that we might do that as a boundaryless person might be constantly assessing and asking, okay, do I have to make this right? I need to make this right. I've got to change something. I've got to change your opinion of me so that I can feel good about me.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
And if you spend most of your time, we can flip flop to each side of the spectrum, but if you spend a good amount of your time in this boundaryless side of the continuum, then chances are that you could be what is also called love dependent, or sometimes called a love addict. And what does that even mean? Well, it means that you're dependent, again, on this external stimuli to determine how you feel. And if the feedback you get is bad, you feel bad. If the feedback is good, you feel good. So to connect this with some other concepts that you've heard in the past, there's some really popular buzzwords today, but a boundaryless person is likely going to have an anxious attachment style, an anxious pursuer, if you've heard of the pursuer withdrawal dynamic. So if you know those words, a boundaryless person is usually an anxious pursuer attachment style.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question to consider, and I want you just to think about this. How do you know when you've done a good job? Do you have this internal sense of it? Or do you need someone else to tell you that you did a good job? Or maybe it's a bit of both. Try to answer this question honestly. I really want you to think about, how do you know when you've done a good job on whatever task it is?
Yeah. And this kind of causes me to reflect a little bit on how I used to be compared to generally how I am now. And I remember back in the past, I could have had lots and lots of great feedback about something. I could have had hundreds of 5-star reviews, for example, but just one negative review, just a little bit of negative feedback, right? One person could say something that would destroy me. And it wouldn't have mattered if 300 people or 400 people or 500 people had positive feedback. It was that one, the one that would cause me to get really reactive, want me to feel like I needed to do something about it. So that should indicate to you or tell you that I was probably spending a lot of time in the boundaryless position in the past. So I struggled with that of being more boundaryless.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think we can be boundaryless in some aspects of our life with having really good boundaries in the other, or even as you mentioned, with some people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. It isn't always a constant.
Yeah. So when you're boundaryless, there's no internal regulation. You ebb and flow based on the environment around you. Sort of like a lizard or a cold-blooded animal where you take your temperature from the warmth of the rock that you're actually lying on. And that's really what it means to be boundaryless.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one side of this continuum.
One side. Is there another side?
So yeah, let's flip
Right?
the coin over.
Yeah.
What do you think is on the other side of boundarylessness? If boundarylessness is no psychological protection, then the other side is probably too much psychological protection.
Yeah. I want to call it boundary much, but Charlotte told me that wasn't a good term.
Confusing.
Yeah.
Okay. So too much protection.
Too much boundary. Yeah.
Too much boundary.
Yeah. So this other dysfunction is called being walled off. Mm-hmm. Right. And when you're walled off, there's a ton of protection, right? Your force field's super thick, double layers, nothing can get through, and you're protected from this outside stimuli, but there's really no connection. You can't reach through and connect. You're sort of living in this empty fortress, right? And instead of letting everything in, nothing gets on. We're walled off, and people live behind this wall to minimize contact. And I might say minimize feedback that they might get from others.
And to minimize vulnerability, and to minimize connection, and to minimize intimacy.
Right. Nothing gets through.
Nothing gets through.
It's a very superficial way to live.
It's an empty fortress.
Yeah.
Right. So as we've discussed in the past, in several of our past episodes, one of the great challenges of having great love is the ability to go, okay, I need to maintain my connection with you without losing me. I still need to have my own autonomy, but also be able to have connection with another person. And that's a difficult, challenging balance for people. But a walled off person definitely prioritizes one over the other. A walled off person hyper values autonomy and undervalues that attachment and connection with people. They keep people at arm's length, and they do that in order to manage their own sense of self. Yeah. It's kind of like saying, by making you less important or being less involved with you, then I can stay true to me. I can safely hold on to myself. I can protect my sense of self through separation, right? Through more prioritizing autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. And these walls, very thick walls, come in so many different forms, right? There's anger, there's depression, there's the guy or the girl that's always busy, or maybe just physical separation and distance. And sometimes these walls are built with words.
Yeah, good or bad.
Right, yeah. And, people can talk a lot without really ever revealing who they are. Have you ever had one of those superficial conversations? You talk to somebody at a party and you're like, I know nothing about them.
I just talked to that person for 30 minutes and I have no idea who they are.
Yeah. So there are many ways to sort of pretend to be connected without ever really allowing genuine contact. And the root of being walled off is this sort of hypervigilance of protection over connection. Right? We want to protect rather than connect. And you can't connect when the walls are up.
Right. Especially when it's a walled fortress.
He's so distant.
Right. And if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who lives literally behind a wall, you know it. You know how painful it can be.
Hard to connect.
It feels like no matter what you do, you can't penetrate their fortress or make any kind of real contact. They're always distant or distracted or just emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
And for the person who is on the other side of that, I mean, it can feel as if, gosh, this person isn't even invested here with me in this relationship. And it can leave you feeling rejected and lonely because that wall is literally preventing you from really knowing or being known by them.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Even if, like Robert said, they could come across as talkative, even friendly, even cheerful. It's not always like a negative, but it's just like, they're just walled off and fundamentally unknowable.
Yeah. And that might be the way that they find peace.
It is.
But it comes at a cost.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of an attachment style, this walled off person is likely an avoidant, dismissive attachment style. They prioritize their protection at the cost of any connection. They're afraid that if they take down their walls, that they'll be left vulnerable and laid bare with really no way to defend themselves. By limiting contact, they sort of manage. It's another way that they can manage their sense of self.
Yes.
Yeah.
So often, a person who leans toward being walled off, they may have grown up. It could be because of past relationships that they've had that they're protecting themselves, but they also may have grown up with a boundaryless parent, someone who was invasive when they were younger, intrusive, or emotionally dependent on them. So being close to someone is scary. Being close to someone can feel all consuming, as though, oh man, if I step fully into a relationship, I'm going to lose myself, but also it may just be really overwhelming and I might feel like I'm just going to be obliterated by this relationship.
Yeah. So what does a healthy boundary look like in real time? So let's say you're giving me feedback.
Okay. I'm giving you feedback.
And as I'm connected to you, I'm open, I'm curious, and I'm trying to remain engaged. And I'm sifting through your words as you're giving me feedback. I'm just going through them point by point, asking myself, okay, is this piece of feedback she gave me, is this true? It might not be true. Maybe I don't know right away. And maybe I just need to consider, like thoughtfully consider the feedback that you've given me. So I set it aside for some time and then I reflect on it.
Right.
If someone says to me like, oh, well, you're being selfish. You might think, well, like I can be selfish from time to time. That's actually possible. Let me take a look within and ask myself, am I acting for my best self or am I just really doing something that benefits me and not those around me? Or you may even just ask one of your friends. By the way, your friends and your spouse will often give you really good advice if you ask them to, but it's going to be really good feedback and you might be ready for that.
So if you decide the feedback is true,
right,
then you can relax your boundary. You can let that information in. You can soften the boundary, let the information in.
And say, I accept this.
Right.
Yeah.
And if that information is not true, which often it is not true, your boundary stays firm and the feedback just bounces off like splat. It just hits your boundary. Splat. True. Okay. You can come in. Not true. Splat. Because why would you take in something that isn't true? Why would you take in something, get reactive, get upset, change your whole world over it if it isn't true?
Yeah, I think we do this sometimes, right? Right. And it's probably because we care about the other person's perception of us, right?
We do.
But sometimes our feedback has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the situation and their day and what they're going through.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to think, okay, this is probably more about them than it is about me. And I've had many experiences like this. I can give many examples going home to visit family, for example. There's oftentimes you go to see the in-laws, you go home to family and you start to hear all the criticism come in, splat, 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 splat. Okay, maybe that's true. I'll let that in. But I was thinking today just about an experience I had many years ago, actually now, but I was receiving some really harsh feedback and it was from a friend. And she was upset anyway, generally about life. And as I'm hearing her words, trying to be engaged, trying to stay connected with it, I realized there was probably 10% of what she was saying that there was some truth that I needed to look at. But 90% of it just was like, no, that's not really true. I think this is really more about her than it is about me. But I listened and I worked hard to steady my heart, steady my mind, avoid responding defensively. And I just kept internally saying over and over, this is more about them, less about me. They're upset. Things are going on in their life, and just try to be compassionate to that. And at the end of it all, I remember just saying something along the lines of, thanks for the feedback. I will take it seriously, and I'm definitely going to consider everything that you shared with me today. Thanks for sharing that with me. And then that was it, right? Yeah,
but what you just described is the basis of valuative evolution. Mm-hmm. So as our boundaries evolve, I'm going to accept, I'm going to reject that piece of information, right? Mm-hmm. Now, and then we talked about this on the last episode and the one before, where we're just evaluating how we can change and grow based on feedback. Mm-hmm. And we evolve from that, either adjusting our boundaries here and there, letting more in, being a little bit firmer in some areas, being less firm in others, because maybe you're too closed off, or maybe you're not receiving feedback, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And this can be with friendships. Obviously, this can be with work relationships, but it can also function very much the same way, obviously, in our marriage, in our romantic relationship.
And there's times when you've been upset with me and I might see that, or I might see that you're coming through the lens of what you see happening in the moment, or maybe a reaction. And maybe you're accurate, and maybe you're not entirely accurate, but I can still be compassionate,
right,
with the feedback that you're giving, and understand that it might just be your perception, right? And if it stays outside my boundary, fine. And if I let it in, fine, right? And so having a boundary, doesn't mean that you stop caring about the other person or even caring about the feedback that they give you, right? It just means that you don't have to internalize the ideas or some of the things that don't belong to you, and recognizing, as we said in the beginning, the parts that are yours and the parts that are mine. And that's what a healthy kind of vibrant boundary does for you.
Exactly.
But I might add that boundaries are this dynamic living thing.
Yeah.
We have to continue to evaluate
moment
and adjust.
To moment.
Yeah. Moment to moment. Absolutely. Yeah.
So like Robert has said a couple of times, a healthy boundary is going to define and delineate what is yours. What are you responsible for? What is mine? What am I responsible for? And it does two really important things. Okay. It protects other people from the worst in us, our bad behaviors, by allowing us to see where we're honestly being unreasonable. But it also protects us from other people who are psychologically intrusive. So it shields us from someone who's being contemptuous, critical, unkind in some way, right? It allows us to hold on to our self-worth, our value, and knowing that we are inherently of value, but also open to change where needed, but not taking in those contemptuous comments that are untrue.
Yeah, and this is super challenging to do.
It is challenging.
And it takes a lot of growth, right?
Absolutely is.
Yeah. And it's absolutely difficult, but so worth it, because a functional boundary is what makes it possible to maintain a close connection with someone else. It's what makes us capable of intimacy by letting ourselves be vulnerable and letting ourselves be truly known. And you can't do that if the walls are up. And you can't do that if I'm waiting for you to tell me how to feel.
Right. Good point.
Now, would you like to have a functional boundary?
I think that would be really helpful. I'm in. Right. Let's do it.
So Charlotte's going to guide us through an exercise. It's a visualization meditation that you can do right now, or maybe later. If you're listening to the podcast in the car, we want to do this when we're at home.
Yeah, you might want to take a note of the time stamp right now, push pause, do this later. But if you're willing to do it now, just go ahead and listen to the sound of my voice and allow yourself to follow along. It's really easy to do. And if you're in a safe place to do so, just take a moment to get comfortable. Close your eyes if you can. So take a couple of deep, slow breaths in and out. And again, in and out. Feel yourself becoming more and more relaxed with each breath as you allow your mind to settle and to drift into a calm, focused state. Now imagine yourself in a place that feels special to you, a place where you can relax fully. Maybe it's somewhere you've been before, or maybe it's a place you create totally in your mind. It could be a beautiful spot in nature, like the mountains, the ocean. It could even be a peaceful corner of your home. Wherever it is, let it come into focus now. Take a moment and really feel yourself there. Feel the gentle air around you, the textures beneath you, the soothing sounds that surround you. Maybe you hear birds, waves, or the soft rustling of leaves. Notice the smells, the warmth or coolness on your skin, and let yourself sink deeper, deeper into the experience. Let yourself truly enjoy this moment, feeling safe, open, and comfortable. Now, holding on to that good feeling, let it fill you completely. And as you hold on to that feeling, allow the image of the place to gently fade away, but keep and hold on to the relaxation, the peace, the comfort within you. You're here now in this moment, but you carry the feeling with you, wrapped all around you as you focus on that sensation. And I want you to multiply that sensation. Let it grow and expand, feeling 10 times stronger. Feel it envelop you, surrounding you 360 degrees. And now imagine around you there's a boundary that feels just right for you. It could be anything, a shimmering force field, a soft glowing bubble, or maybe something more playful, or creative, like a beautiful suit of armor or a glittering shield. A friend of mine once imagined hers as a sparkling white supersuit, shining with this protective light around her. What does yours look like? Whatever it is, let it be strong and impenetrable, yet also clear. If you need a window or a way to see out, let that appear now too. You can see everything clearly, but nothing can harm you. This is your boundary. Feel how good it is to have it. Stay right here inside your boundary. Notice how it feels, how strong it is, how protective it is. You're safe. Your boundary is impenetrable. An emotional bomb could go off 2 feet away and you would still feel completely protected. Nothing gets in unless you choose to let it in. Nothing. You decide what enters and what stays out. And this is effortless. It's easy. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is remember that your boundary is there for you. You can always put it up when you need it. Inside your boundary, you feel open, spacious, relaxed. You feel curious about the world around you, but also deeply connected to yourself and to others. You know your worth, your value. You don't need to defend or explain yourself. Your boundary does all of that for you. You can feel that now, can't you? Can you feel how good it is to have this boundary protecting you while you remain calm and strong within? Yes, that's right. It feels good, doesn't it? And when you're ready, open your eyes.
All right. Now that you've got your boundary in place, how are you going to use it this week? Remember, this isn't just theory, it's practice. It's not about thinking or overanalyzing. It's about doing it in the moment when things get intense. If you've been hiding behind a wall, it's time to soften that wall and stay connected. And if you've been too open, too porous, let that boundary surround you. Don't let in anything that isn't yours or isn't true, and hold on to your worth while staying in a connection. This is a moment-to-moment practice. Between now and next episode, we want you to walk through your day with that boundary up. When things get heated with your partner, put it up. If you slip and get reactive, no big deal. Take a deep breath, reset, put your boundary back up again. You've got this.
Yeah. So here is something really exciting. Okay. Next week, we're going to put together boundaries, which we talked about today, and self-esteem, which we talked about last week. We're going to put it all together and really give you the juicy stuff next week. Something that it show you how these two things work hand in hand. So we're going to teach you how to put all of this together next week, not just for you, but also for better understanding your partner. So you won't want to miss next week's episode. It's going to be a game changer. So if you haven't yet already, hit that subscribe button to make sure you're the first to know when that episode drops.
Yeah, that's going to be easy. And then just remember this week, again, practice on your boundary, whether you need to soften it, whether you need to strengthen it, and then you'll be ready for the good stuff next week. And before we go, if you found value in today's episode, please do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review and a comment. The algorithm really depends on your feedback there. So your feedback helps us reach more and more people and make a greater impact on the world. And if there's anybody that you feel this episode would be beneficial to, would you please share it with them?
Be kind to each other this week. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest difference.
Until next time.